But I'm very happy to be here, and really on behalf of the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Campaign National Committee, which is the Palestinian coordinating body for the international BDS movement, I want to really thank the organizers for convening, I think, what promises to be yet another milestone in the BDS movement. Students and all those present and future BDS activists, I think, should really applaud themselves right now for coming out this weekend to be part of this growing international movement for divestment sanctions, which really aims to begin to hold Israel accountable for its numerous violations of not only Palestinian human rights, but international law. And I'd like to share with you today just some elements that I think should be taken into consideration as you go through the next few days and either begin to plan launching a BDS campaign or to work towards strengthening an existing campaign in your various organizations, universities, campuses, and cities. And I think at the same time, we will work collectively to figure out a way to move the national agenda for BDS forward in the next couple of days. So it's important to note that BDS is very strongly rooted in the Palestinian resistance movement. As far back as 1936, we had the Great Revolt, where Palestinian movement carried out general strikes against the British at the time and refused to pay taxes to the British Mandate government. We also had general strikes from the period from 1948 to 1967 and different times to protest the Israeli aggression, the confiscation of land, and the imprisonment, killing, and injuring of Palestinians. During the first Intifada, in January 5th, 1988, several prominent Palestinians called for boycott of Israeli products. And throughout the Intifada, the Palestinians carried out the general and commercial strikes to support both the boycott of Israeli products as they simultaneously began to develop cooperatives to establish Palestinian alternatives to Israel. Palestinians also resigned from their posts at the Israeli military administration, and the Palestinian Council of Higher Education, which comprised all Palestinian university presidents at the time, rejected the cooperation of any kind with Israeli academic institutions. This position has been upheld ever since then. And it's really because there have been sustainable and systematic attacks against the Palestinian educational system throughout the Israeli occupation and colonization. During the first Intifada, within weeks of the beginning, in December 1987, Israel closed down all 6 Palestinian universities, 13 colleges, and 5 training centers. On February 2nd, 1988, the Israeli army ordered all 1,194 Palestinian schools to be closed until further notice. And less than a year later, even kindergartens were also closed down by military orders. Many of these institutions stayed closed throughout the 4 years of the first Intifada. They made Palestinian education effectively illegal. The systematic suppression of Palestinian education by Israel could be seen in other instances as well. Following the 6-month-long siege of Gaza, which had already killed hundreds of Palestinians and blocked medical supplies and food and gasoline and electricity, Operation Cast Lead, which was its name by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, killed 1,400 Palestinians and injured 5,000 more in December 2008 and January of 2009. A third of these casualties were children. Israel demolished Palestinians' homes, schools, universities, mosques, food markets, and carried out horrendous war crimes. The term scholasticide was used to describe the systematic destruction by Israeli forces of centers of education, as the Ministry of Education was bombed, the infrastructure of teaching destroyed, and schools across the Gaza Strip targeted for attacks by the air, the sea, and ground defenses. Even Palestinian students in Israel are targeted. In a November 11, 2009, open letter to the Board of Governors of Trondheim University commending the university boycott decision, Abna al-Balad, which represented Arab students at Israeli universities, discussed the various discriminatory policies that were being used by Israeli academic institutions to keep Arab students out and deny them scholarships on the basis of their failure to serve in the Israeli army. Their letter talked about the indoctrination process of the public schools, where curriculum contains very little, if any at all, of Palestinian history and culture, as it aims to erase our historical memory and promote the official policy line. In response to Israel's systematic oppression of not only the educational system, but all facets of Palestinian human, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, we have seen a reemergence of boycott as a form of resistance. The current BDS movement dates back to 2001 in Durban, South Africa, when despite Western governments' unwillingness to hold Israel to account, the non-governmental forum of the UN World Conference Against Racism widely adopted a resolution stating that Israel's special form of apartheid must be met with the same tools that brought down its South African predecessor. In 2002, the flagrant violations of the Israeli occupation against Palestinian educational institutions and the complicity of Israeli academia prompted a number of calls for boycott of Israeli academic institutions. These initiatives reflected a growing awareness of the potentially effective role that international academic community could play in placing the necessary pressure on Israel and its academic institutions, and thereby its government, to end the occupation. In 2002, British academics called for a moratorium on all cultural and research links with Israeli academic institutions, specifically questioning the special status afforded to the Israeli academia by the European Union. Similar boycott calls were launched in France and in Belgium and in Australia and in Canada and in South Africa. And in the United States, a number of university campaigns calling for divestment from companies profiting from the occupation emerged. In February of 2002, a national conference centered on divestment as a strategy for pro-Palestinian campus activism convened in Berkeley, California. Simultaneously, divestment calls came from Harvard, MIT, Columbia, Michigan, Illinois, Stanford, and elsewhere. These initiatives were widely commended. In October of 2002, Archbishop Desmond Tutu stated, "If apartheid in South Africa ended, so can this occupation. But the moral force and international pressure will have to be just as determined." The current divestment effort is the first move in this direction. The potential of the divestment movement could be seen in the extreme response of its opponents. Also in October 2002, no less than 300 US university presidents signed on an advertisement in the New York Times against the divestment campaigns, labeling them as anti-Semitic. And this is a charge I want to deal with in a little bit. While many of these campaigns faltered, they nevertheless were essential and need to be credited for several reasons. First of all, they hardened Palestinians who were at the time under a constant, brutal Israeli attack throughout Jenin, Gaza, Ramallah, Nablus, and Hebron. And I know because I was there at the time. And we could not leave our houses for days at a time. And it was important for us to know that there were, even though governments were doing nothing to stop the Israeli attacks, there were individuals that were committed to carrying out morally conscientious impunity against Israel for its actions. They provided us a basis for the current organizing, and they provide an example of strategies that may or may not work. And I think in a little bit we're going to hear from some of these activists, and it's important to understand what that process was about and what worked and what didn't at the time. And finally, they developed really valuable resources that should be reviewed and help to inform the more recent initiatives. We don't want to keep recreating the wheel, and we need to see what's out there, and there's a lot of information. The web is an amazing tool that people really need to use ultimately in order to move forward. So all of these initiatives inspired the Palestinian movement, building on its inherent strategy of boycott within its struggle. It launched the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel in 2004. And the objective was to promote further initiatives, but also to develop a Palestinian-led strategy for boycott. It's important to note that the focus on academic and cultural boycott as the starting point was no coincidence. Even though it posed the greatest challenge, Palestinians felt that